Hi, how are you?
Hey, how are you?
Can you hear me? Good, how are you?
Can you hear me?
You're breaking up a little bit.
Oh no.
There you are now.
How are you?
I'm
What
doing
a great
well. How are
Saturday.
you?
I'm
I
doing
know,
well.
it's beautiful. I see Ingrid joining us. I see Ama Chang. Oh, you keep cutting out, Nidhi. Hi, Yana. Hi, Graciela. Nidhi, can you hear us?
I can hear you. I can hear you. Your video's coming
Okay.
in loud and clear.
Okay, great. We will get started then. For those who are joining, my name is Sabrina. I am the Deputy Editor of New York Yoga Life magazine. Today, I am joined by Nidhi Kaur Bagga. Nidhi is a writer, professor, PhD, yogi, backpacker, has a wealth of knowledge in so many different areas. I am super pumped to have her speak with us today. You recently wrote an article for our digital healing issue, so we're going to be talking a little bit more about that today. Do you want to just give a brief bio about yourself and a brief intro of what we'll be talking about?
Sure. Um, Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. My name is Nidhi. I am a writer by trade. It's what I do day in and day out. I went to school for pharmacy, so I'm a pharmacist, and I have a very niche interest in specifically neuroplasticity and to adapt and change to our environment and our circumstances. So the article that we'll be, I guess, diving into and sort of the topics of area that we'll be discussing surrounds that, and it's our capacity to actually shape and change the way we think and the structure of our brain.
Great. So let's dive right into that because that is what is really interesting to me. So tell me, explain a little bit about the neuronal network of the brain and how that works.
So, the brain is this incredible feat of nature. It's this complex network that guides and dictates how we exist in the world today. It's how we perceive our realities. It's how we engage with our environment, and it's how we engage with ourselves. Um, so the brain itself is made out of billions and billions of neurons, and these neurons communicate with one another in order for us to exist, in order for us to be human, to do things that we do to engage with the world in the way in which we do. Um, what's incredible is is how our neurons work together and change pending the circumstances or pending our environment. So a neuron, let's break it down to just what a neuron is. So a neuron cell itself is made up of three parts. There's a dendrite, cell body, and the axon. So how this works is your dendrites receive signals from other neurons. Your cell body or the cell body of a neuron processes these signals. And the axon takes these chemicals, which we talk about and hear about and we associate with our emotions and feelings, things like serotonin and dopamine and chemicals that are transferred uh, through the axon and to another dendrite of another neuron. It's that communication that causes us to have a thought, causes us to move. And within the brain, this complex net of neurons working and firing every single moment of your existence.
Oh, you are cutting out again. We lost you. Hang on, everyone. I'll try to get Nidhi again. Let's see. It looks like she is not up again yet. If there is anyone else in the audience who knows about this topic, feel free to give me a wave. We'll put you on the screen in the meantime. Let's see. Here she is. All right, it looks like Nidhi is trying to connect again. There you are.
Oh.
Your photo is much more clear now, so hopefully we'll be good from this point out.
Okay, good. So just back to what we were saying, so essentially what happens, there's three major ways in which the brain evolves and adapts to our environment and our circumstances, and it is chemical, functional, and structural. Chemical is when you decide to engage in another activity, for example, or you decide to engage in a different way of looking at something, a fresh perspective, a new just a new way of engaging with something that you engage perpetually with on a day-to-day basis. These neurochemicals are essentially like a detailed list of what to do. And so what they do when it moves from one neuron to the next neuron, it's passing on this information, this to-do list of this is how we are going to engage in this moment. And if you make the choice to for example, learn a new instrument, you're creating a new pathway. You're changing the way that these chemicals are passing from one neuron to another, the way one neuron is speaking to another neuron. And the more you repeat that behavior of practicing guitar every single day, you strengthen that communication between the first neuron and the second neuron, and you begin to weaken other neurons that aren't supporting you learning to be better at guitar. Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah.
There's something called a functional change. So in the process of doing that, as that neuron becomes stronger and more what the brain goes to. So next, let's say you picked up a guitar today, it was your first time. 3 months from now, when you pick up that guitar, your brain is already sending signals in a certain pathway, or probably billions or hundreds and thousands of pathways that are helping you learn the guitar, to engage your fingers in a certain way, to strum the chords in a specific way, to hear for the tuning. And that becomes your functional change within the pathways, right? And the structural change is when parts of the brain begin to physically change in size. For example, if you're right-handed, the part of your left, the portion of the brain in your left hemisphere is going to be larger than the portion on your right. But if you were left-handed, the portion on the right would be bigger than the portion on the left. And that is a structural difference depending on where your dominance lies.
So, for the naysayers who think that they are too far gone in negative thought patterns or habits, you would say that's not true then?
I would say you're maybe at even an advantage because you understand how uh, powerful of an association a certain thought pattern and a certain emotion can have with one another. Um, you have maybe the best tool to be able to um, re-navigate yourself. If you are in a state of perpetual negative thinking, then you understand what it's like to carve a neuronal pathway to actually have that firing of the synapses dictate on autopilot when you're in the middle of a circumstance or situation where you're feeling stressed. So for you to step away from that and to change that negative thought pattern, that behavior is not necessarily going to be easier, but you will recognize when it has shifted in a way that's serving you. Um, it's a challenging thing to do for anyone. And if you're in a place of negative thinking and of self-doubt that this isn't something that you're capable of doing, you've already been doing it at a disservice to yourself. And that's okay too, because we learn a lot from our negative emotions. We learn a lot about our thought patterns. We learn a lot about what our perspective of the world is and how we respond to stressful situations. And those are all important key elements in helping to facilitate change that rewires your brain for increased happiness, for increased gratitude, and just an overall more positive life experience.
So, when it comes to happiness, gratitude, positive thinking, what steps are best? Is it meditation, positive affirmations, positive self talk? What would you suggest?
There are so many mediums available out there to help facilitate change within your brain. And meditation is an incredible vehicle, an incredible way in which to do that, because essentially when you're able to anchor into the present moment, what you're doing is you're creating a space between that initial trigger, which causes you to go on this negative thinking path. So we talk about this in the wellness community all the time, right? What you think you become. And that's true because essentially the more you engage with a specific kind of thought, the more you are making that pathway within the brain uh, deeper and stronger. And the stronger it is, the quicker your brain is to go on autopilot and engage with that negative thinking pattern. Um, it's I think when you are able to create space between the initial, so back to your question, if you're able to create space between the initial trigger, what sort of pushes you into this pattern, into this wave, you're able to change the way you respond to stress. And the stress being, for example, we all have somebody in our lives that kind of maybe immediately makes us just angry or just like upset, or you're just annoyed by them immediately. I remember growing up, for me that was my mom, and somehow family has a way to trigger your button. They just know.
I can't relate to that at all. Not at all.
But it's that's the magic. It's, I would say, people who feel that they're at a disadvantage, that are that have experiences that are really tough, are really they have the best frame of reference to compare their growth against, because you are moving from this like trigger happy response that you have when you see somebody. Like, for example, if my mother were to come in and come downstairs and interrupt this call, I think it would set me off in a way that's very autopilot, very automatic based on my experiences growing up as a kid. But the difference between then and now is with a regular meditation practice, I have been able to cultivate a space between that trigger of her coming downstairs and my immediate response of going down this negative neural pathway. And it really does come down to simple situations like that. It's taking one small experience and allowing yourself to sit with it in silence, and being okay with the fact that you are thinking even when you're trying to meditate, and understanding that if you can anchor back into the present moment, you can create that space. And it's in that space that you are starting to rewire your response to stress.
So for people who are brand new to this, first steps on where to start. And I'm paraphrasing, but I think in the article that you wrote for us, you mentioned something about like grooves in the brain. And I would love if you just touched a little bit more on that, as well as first steps if somebody's new to this.
So I'm going to backtrack a little here. And I think what's important to talk about is the way in which we think, the way in which we perceive our environment and interact with our environment dictates which neurons in our brain are fired. The more that we engage with our environment or in situations in a negative way, the more we reinforce those specific neuronal pathways. Thereby, those grooves within the brain are deeper, are stronger, and your brain is more anchored in moving through autopilot in that way. It's when we are able to recognize that our mind or our consciousness, this ever-present narrative that we carry with us through every single moment of our existence, is something that influences the way we continue to think in the future, because it impacts the structure of the brain, which dictates what we're thinking in the first place, is an awareness of itself. And to have even just understood that alone will already cascade a series of positive changes in how you approach your wellness practice. Remind me what your question was again.
So I want on that aspect of the grooves, which I just love that analogy there. And if somebody's brand new to this, and the way that you just phrased it, I think really speaks to people who may be, skeptical of meditation. So for somebody who's brand new to this, first steps on what to do to cultivate, whether it's, more positive thought patterns or, more positive habits in their lives.
I think a great way to step into this is to understand what motivates you to engage with your wellness. What is motivating you to consider taking a first step? Write it down. And each time you start to deviate from it, and you have a self-limiting thought, you have a reason to believe that you don't need to be down this path, or that you can't do it, write it down. And as you start to write it down, it doesn't have to be anything formal. It's a stream of consciousness. There's no editing involved in the process. But if you write it down, then you are going to start, unveiling your own pattern. There's something pretty, I think, cathartic about taking something that's internally maybe causing you a little bit of turmoil, whether it's on a bigger scale or a smaller scale, and getting it down on paper and looking at it. Because now when you have something written in front of you, the way in which you're digesting is not internalized, is now become externalized. And in doing that, allow it to be another motivating factor to sit down and be here now, engage with your present moment. Because when we're lost in thought, we're often ruminating in the past, or sort of forging ahead into a future that we really can't control or dictate any circumstances or nuances. And we know that, right? We as human beings, one of our greatest flaws is that we think that somehow by thinking a lot and stressing a lot, we can change something that's happened in the past, or we can control something that's going to happen in the future. And neither are really possible or true. You can heal from something in your past, and you can make changes that positively impact the way in which your future unfolds, but you cannot control it, and you cannot change something that's already occurred. So being able to, I think, be okay with being not okay, be okay with being here and engaging with your environment right now. I think that's a very powerful thing. If you're able to sit down, take a breath, and if you don't feel comfortable closing your eyes, to fully engage with something within your visual spectrum is powerful. If you can sit down and look at a cup that you put down that you were drinking water from and engage with it. I mean, really look at the structure, look at the way the light hits it, look at the way the air feels around you as you're viewing or looking at this cup. Is it full? Is it empty? Is it water? Is it juice? Can you smell it? Do you hear sounds around you while you're looking at the cup of water or juice or whatever it is that you drank? I mean, if you can come into the present moment after you write something down, when you start to write down these breaks in positive consciousness, and these when you have these limiting thoughts or these reasons to believe that you don't need to be down this path, and you can stop and engage with anything that's in your present moment, you've already started to rewire your brain. You've created a space between that trigger, which was that initial thought, that pattern that you're unveiling by writing down over. I promise you, write it down every single time. Carry a small notebook for 2 weeks. Write down every time you have a thought and you think, oh, I can't do this. I wouldn't be any good at this. Who would want to listen to me? Who would do this? What if I fail? What if every single time you have it, without judgment, write it down. In 2 weeks, I guarantee you're going to look back and you're going to be a completely different person, because you're going to have unveiled a pattern by essentially unlocking a level of your consciousness. You're unlocking a level of your awareness. And then when you come back to the present moment, each time you have a thought, you're now rewiring your brain. So in that stress response, in that moment where you're experiencing it, you're actually creating a space to create a neuronal pathway that is serving you, that is rewired for greater happiness.
So I know when I start a new practice, and this is probably not the most mindful way of thinking about it, but I'm always thinking, how long is it going to take for this to really affect change? So for people who are into instant gratification, I know there's got to be at least one other person listening that feels this way. How long does it really take, and maybe it's not such a black and white answer, to create changes in the brain so that you're creating changes, whether it be lifestyle or thought patterns?
It's interesting, right? As human beings and as a society, we try to have things exist in like binaries. Like, what's the way to make it definitely happen or not happen? Is it yes or is it no? Is it right or is it wrong? The way in which I'm approaching something. But the truth is that we are so complex. Each of our brains, each of our experiences before and after is vastly different. The way in which you can adopt a practice and the way in which I can adopt a practice in of itself is different. The way in which my brain will change structurally will be nothing like the way your brain will adapt and change. Here's what I'll say. we have these we talk about how it takes 3 weeks to build a habit or to change a habit. Some say it takes 2 months. When it comes down to the science of it, of how our brain physically and actually changes, um, some studies have shown that it takes roughly 2 months for you to really carve out a neuronal pathway that's fresh and that's different, that you've repeatedly engaged with. But we can even break that down further, because now you have something called like a long-term memory and a short-term memory, right? So you can have neurons, and that's the most incredible thing about them, is that you can have neurons that are a period of time, but they disappear. They only show up for a couple hours. They only show up for a couple days because you've engaged with them to that degree, and then kaput, it's gone. You know, so it's this idea: if you don't use it, you lose it. So while in a while everybody wants this like really sweet answer of, in 2 months you're going to be a changed person by giving a practice. You're going to be a changed person if you're watching this video at the end of the call. Every experience is going to change you in a way. It's the ability to stay with it. It's the ability to repeat it. It's the ability to repeat it despite another part of your consciousness or another part of your experience in the present moment, motivating you not to. And the longer and for many of us in the yoga community, we know that it's a lifelong practice. So each time you meditate, each time you engage with a medium that is meaningful to you, that helps you cultivate the space. It could be an embodied meditation. It could be a walking meditation. It could be writing, just writing a lot. Maybe you're an author that you've never unleashed your words to the world, and that for you is your form of meditation, and that is wonderful. It's engaging with it on a regular basis, so that something isn't a habit, but it's a part of the way in which you deal with stress, with the way you deal with negative thinking. The more you do it, the stronger your neuronal pathways will get. The stronger your neuronal pathways get, the increase in functional change you'll experience. The more functional change you have, the more structural change you have. The more structural change you have, the more permanent, or the longer, the more it will withstand the test of time, if you will. But it's what you do every day. It's, for example, I played piano when I was younger. I played for many years. And if you were to ask me to play something now, while I can, I would say that I was rusty. And you would hear that from many people that have played and then stopped playing. While they have these neural pathways, these grooves that were established and really seated in over many, many years. Rusty means that when those neurons haven't been firing for the past decade, because they were reinforced to the degree that they were during this critical period, during this younger period, it doesn't necessarily mean that they were what they once were. Does that make sense? So you can engage in meditation for 2 years, but then if you stop and then you come back and you're like, well, I did this for so long, it's within me, it's a practice, I'm good at this, you'll notice, you'll see your stress response shift, for worse and then for better, depending on what you do.
Well, and I like that you bring up a musical instrument, or I'm assuming even a sport, because I think that's very relatable to a lot of people, and that makes sense, especially when we're talking about mindfulness, which may seem a little esoteric to some people. You blew my mind when you said there are neurons that can show up for just a few hours and then be gone. Very interesting stuff.
It is, right? I mean, yeah. I as an adult, post my education, my formal education, realized that when I would cram for a test, essentially what I was doing was I was inviting this party of neurons that showed up for a couple of days or maybe a couple of weeks and helped me get through a specific experience, a specific test, and then I don't quite recall every element or every piece of something that I learned in that cramming session. And that's because there's science to prove it. There's your neurons are remarkable. Your brain is remarkable. The way in which
Donna is so
it it adapts. It knows when it needs to put its energy into something that's going to serve you, that's going to allow you to keep perpetuating forward, and then it knows when to pull back. It knows. I'll give you we won't really get too much into this, but something that's really interesting is, and you've heard this, I don't know if you're a mom, but there's a critical period, right? There's critical periods during your brain's development when your brain essentially is like flooding your brain with neurons. And they're like, all right, I'm going to give you 200 billion neurons. And your brain's like, I only need 100. And they're like, it's fine, but take what you need. And you have this critical growth period where, like, a child is able to learn 4 different languages with no accent just simultaneously. And it's during these critical growth periods that these neurons are building these skill sets, these learned behaviors that stay with you for a really, really long time. And it was always thought that as adults, we wouldn't be able to do that. We wouldn't be able to have an experience where you can learn and grow. I mean, it's true, you won't learn and grow the same way you do in the critical period, but it doesn't mean that you can't. It doesn't mean that neurons don't come into the picture for a period of time to allow for a new pathway to exist, for new learning to come in. The old adage, old dogs can't learn new tricks, has never been more false. and we know that. We've always known that on some level. There's a question, does age affect neuron firing? Age definitely plays a role in the way in which your neurons fire, the way in which your neurons interact with one another. But it doesn't mean that because you're older, because you're no longer in this critical period, this, we talk about how kids between the ages of like 1 and 5 are like sponges, right? Like that's an example of a critical period. As adults, though, it doesn't mean that because we're not in this heightened state of neuronal development and changes and adaptations that we as adults can't change. There's been new studies and new research about how there are maybe like 700 new neurons built by the adult brain, or that are created by the adult brain. Stanford is doing incredible research on how we can help, what this is called is neurogenesis, create new neurons. But the thing is that you don't necessarily need new neurons to be able to change or to learn or to adapt as an adult, because neuroplasticity, the rewiring of neurons, is different than neurogenesis. So neuroplasticity means that the actual pathways are changing based on how you're engaging, again, with your environment, with your thoughts, with your experience. And as an adult, as the older you get, your neurons are going to fire at the rate at which you continually engage with a certain thought pattern or behavior. We can always get into like the nuances of like, what about Alzheimer's or dementia, or what's the impact of that? But that's another conversation for another day.
That's another IG live session.
That's another IG live session.
Any final thoughts before we wrap up? Oh, wait, there's another. Is this a question? So COVID. This is an interesting one.
Oh,
Does COVID affect our neuroplasticity?
I think that the COVID experience 100% on a global scale affected our neuroplasticity, or not so much our neuroplasticity, but um, caused all of our brains to change. The pandemic brought to light a lot of issues, right? Um, Both societal and internal. Mental health has become it's something that's in the forefront of the conversation. There's people that have experienced extensive trauma from losing somebody that had COVID, or having even gone through the experience of having COVID themselves. And in this process, again, the way in which we engage with our thoughts. So if we are thinking in a place of, oh my God, I'm not safe, I'm scared, I'm not safe, I'm not okay. I had COVID. I'm I'm not going to be the same. My family is not okay. I can't see them. When you continually engage in that thought pattern, and I mean, it's been a very traumatic year, and in the middle of this pandemic, there is a good chance that there's a lot of people that have experienced that, and that engagement has, for sure, changed the brains of people, because it's what we're thinking over and over and over again. It's a pathway that we're reinforcing over and over and over again. But that doesn't mean that that's something that can't be mitigated, I suppose. You can eventually, especially this year, post-election, there's been a lot of healing that's begun. There's a lot of positive change that's started to become a part of everyone's everyday. And that's where we're starting, and hopefully, by we I mean collectively as a society, we as individuals are starting to weaken the trauma pathways, the associated response because of a traumatic experience, not the trauma pathway. It's the response to the trauma that we've ingrained in the past 6 to 8 months. We're slowly starting to maybe weaken that pathway by disengaging in as many ways as we can, and starting to re-engage those that are supporting us, that are expanding our current perspectives, and that are and becoming a little bit more inclusive of positive thoughts, of positive experiences, of having softer conversations with ourselves, having conversations with ourselves that are like, Nidhi, you're okay. It's okay that you're not okay today. It's okay that you're struggling a little bit, and it's in changing the conversations that we have with ourselves that we can start to change that response that we've had to trauma. And in doing that, we start to change how we engage with our environment, i.e., how I engage with you, how I engage with my mother, how I engage with my fiance, how you engage with your best friend. It's all a very, as you change, your brain changes. As your brain changes, you change. And as you change and your brain changes, simultaneously, the way in which you interact with the environment changes. And it's fascinating, because then that also has a ripple effect on everyone and everything that's around you.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I think not only the conversation, we're being softer with ourselves, but with each other, right? And it's almost like that saying, misery loves company. The conversation for a long time was very negative amongst everyone. And now it is starting to change. And I think that is helping each other as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. Any final thoughts before we wrap up here?
Final thoughts is, do your best to just show up for the moment, show up for yourself right now, right here. And you'll just by being here will start to change the way your neurons fire, the way your brain operates functionally, the way that your brain is structurally, which is a amazing thing that you can do that. You can change the shape of your brain and increase the part of it that causes happiness. And just come here. Just show up right now with me and engage with all five senses for as long as you can. Start with 1 minute, then start with 3 minutes, then start with 5 minutes, make it to 10 minutes, and watch your life unfold as you actively change the way your brain shows up for you.
We have people commenting that this is fascinating. They really enjoyed this conversation, and I will echo that. Thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. I mean, we could probably talk about this for hours, but I think we all have a better understanding now, and it was so lovely to speak with you and learn from you.
Well, thank you for having me. It was my honor, and I'm sure that I'll see you again soon.
Yes. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. You too.
Bye-bye.